Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to our second edition of Breaking News for this Monday. It's the 21st day of July, 2025, and as usual, we have some very important stories to bring to you that have come across the wires in the last few hours. And these stories, as always, support what the Bible has to say, what our world's going to be like at the time of the end of the age before the second coming of Christ and the many events that will precede it. Now, the first story, it's about time, I guess we would call this one, from Israel National News. A political source says, no more compromises from Israel. Hamas must accept the deal. Yeah, it's about time. Let's see if they will. Interesting that they've gotten to that point, finally. Now, the next three stories we could all call selective outrage. In fact, that's the title of the second headline. Selective outrage. Why the world looks away from Syria's atrocities but fixates on Gaza. Great question. That's from the Jerusalem Post. And then another story that we could call selective outrage from YNET News. As over 25 countries demanded into Gaza war, Israel points the fingers at Hamas. Again, why is anybody blaming Hamas? And finally, you got another story. This one's really bad. The U.S. envoy pans Israel-Syria intervention. The fact that they helped the Druze and intervened in Syria gets panned by a U.S. envoy, doubles down on support for Damascus and this terrorist leader. That's from the Times of Israel. That's very, very bad, as we will talk about. All right, let's look at the headlines. First of all, from a political source, no more compromises from Israel. Hamas must accept the deal. The mediators are trying to put pressure on Hamas to respond to the offer currently on the table, but so far without success. And again, like we said this morning, we've said a number of times, it's Iran saying, no, no, just don't do it. Keep dragging it on. A political source stated that Israel is no longer willing to compromise on the withdrawal maps presented as part of the plan for the release of hostages and a ceasefire. According to the source, Hamas must accept the terms presented that would lead to a ceasefire, ending the suffering for the people of Gaza. Now, according to Khan News, that's KAN, the mediators are trying to exert pressure on the terrorist organization to respond to the proposed deal for the release of the hostages, but without success. Israel is also attempting to apply pressure on the issue, including military actions to challenge the organization and push for progress in the talks. In the meantime, to increase the pressure on Hamas, the IDF has initiated, and this is what's going on right now, a ground maneuver. This is huge in the Deir al-Balah area in the center of the Gaza Strip, marking the first such operation since the beginning of the war. Until now, the IDF has avoided moving closer to the central refugee camps area due to the concerns that the hostages may be held there. The IDF stated that the operation in the area will proceed slowly, with steps being taken to ensure that no danger is posed to the hostages. Now, how do they know where the hostages are, though? If they're somewhere, they think in the area. This is what's really difficult. In fact, there's another story about the hostage families are really worried about this because it's right, seemingly, where they're being held captive. Again, Israel, though, has really no choice in the matter. They cannot let this drag on forever, so they've got to do something. And Hamas is just not, responding. They're, always wasting time, one delay after another. So this is an important story. Let's see what happens. Will Hamas finally give in, or will we just have more fighting? Now, again, the next three stories we could call the first two words of the headline with each of one of these: selective outrage. Why the world looks away from the Syrian atrocities but fixates on Gaza. Great question from the Jerusalem Post. Gaza is widely covered because it's symbolically and politically loaded. Syria is ignored because it is seen as broken and no one cares. And there's also another factor here we'll talk about too, as the article does. The clashes in Syria, pitting Bedouin tribes and the Syrian military against the Druze, began on July 11th with the assault of a Druze merchant by a member of a Bedouin tribe. Fighting escalated quickly. By July 13th, battles were underway in and around the Druze region of Sfaida. Survivors of the fighting over the next 3 days described unspeakable brutality. Pictures emerged of Syrian soldiers humiliating Druze men by shaving off their mustaches, which is an act of deep dishonor in the Druze community. And yet, for the most part, the world didn't take much notice. The first article about the situation to appear on the front page of the New York Times edition was on July 17th, Thursday, July 17th, about 5 days later. But that piece led not with the story of atrocities of Swaida, but with the deadly airstrikes launched by Israel in Damascus. In other words, Israel launches deadly airstrikes. Well, why are they doing this? Because for 4 or 5 days they've been killing these innocent Druze people by the Bedouins and by the Syrian army. That's why, but you never know this from the New York Times. Another piece about the fighting appeared in the Times front page the next day. This one without an Israeli angle in the headline. Battle leaves pall of death on Syrian city. That article dealt with the horrors that took place in the area of Shweda. Tellingly, however, in the 10 days since the incident that spurred the fighting in Syria, a fighting that, according to the UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, has claimed more than 1,200 lives. The New York Times has devoted most of its front page stories and pictures about Gaza and Israel rather than Sweden and Syria. There have been two front page stories about Israeli actions in Gaza and another about efforts at Cheltenham High School near Philadelphia to remove Prime Minister Netanyahu from its Alumni Hall of Fame. During the same period, there were two front page pieces on the clashes in Syria, one of them focusing on the Israeli airstrikes in Damascus, and a third dealing with the discovery of mass graves near Damascus used by Bashar al-Assad's regime to bury opponents during the country's brutal civil war. And in an age when pictures are more important than words, they really are, there were no pictures from Syria, but two large pictures from Gaza on the Times front page during these 10 days. One of Gazans on the beach with a caption saying that Israel prohibits them from entering the water or fishing, and another on Monday showing anguished Palestinian women mourning dead relatives at the Shifa Hospital city in Gaza City. The Times lead story on Monday was Israelis shoot dozens rushing for aid in Gaza, a piece that, as usual, relied heavily on figures provided by Hamas. Numbers Israel insists are significantly inflated, but it makes little effort to counter that because you can't do it in real time. The same day, the Syrian Observatory, now get this, reported 205 people killed in Syria, more than the number cited in Gaza, what, 10 times more. Yet it was Gaza, not Syria, that led the Times front page. And the Times is actually paying more attention to the situation in Syria than many other media outlets, human rights organizations, the UN, or foreign ministries around the world. All right, this isn't new. The disparity in international attention is as predictable as it is stark. Israel-Gaza leads the global conversation. The fighting in Syria, unless Israel is somehow involved, struggles to get notice. And so the question is why? Well, the reflective answer is bias. There's a double standard, as we talk about here all the time, and for a variety of reasons, some have to do with anti-Semitism. That's the key word. Israel is held to different standards and is judged by a different measuring stick. Anti-Semitism is again the answer. Sign 21 of our 25 signs. We're near the end. As we get closer and closer to the time of the end, Israel will be more, just on the outside looking in as far as the world is concerned, separated, taunted, everything you can imagine, just treated with a whole different aspect of way of looking at Israel than looking at any other country in the world. And the reason's real simple. As we've said before, without the Bible fact, we wouldn't know it. The Bible tells us a spiritual battle from day one, that the battle's been between God's word and the world, given through the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the rest of the unbelieving world who doesn't want to hear the truth of the living God. So Israel is always at the center and always, the country that's getting kicked by the other nations of the world. Now, anti-Semitism, again, is the answer. And the next two headlines are going to confirm it. We've got another one now. Headline number 3, as over 25 countries demand end to Gaza war, Israel points finger at Hamas. This is from YNET. In fact, it was good for Mike Huckabee, the ambassador of the United States to Israel. He was outraged at this. And so was Gideon Sa'ar. What's Gideon's? He's the foreign minister, I think, now of Israel. Anyway, in this story in YNET, a coalition of 25 nations in joint statement urged an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, condemns Israel's aid restrictions and displacement plans. Israel has responded by blaming Hamas for the hostage delay deal. Israel has repeatedly said yes to the proposal, but Hamas stubbornly refuses to accept it. I guess they missed that. In show of transcontinental consensus, 25 Western nations, including Australia, Canada, France, Italy, the UK, Japan, Switzerland, New Zealand, and several EU members, in a joint statement, issued a sharp rebuke of Israel's actions in Gaza today on Monday, calling for an immediate halt to the war and warning of the humanitarian catastrophe deepening day by day. This is unreal. Declaring that the death toll on civilians had reached new depths, the coalition of nations insisted that violence must be brought to a close. We urge the parties and the international community to unite in a common effort to bring this terrible conflict to an end through an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire, the joint statement read. Further bloodshed serves no purpose. We reaffirm our complete support to the efforts of the U.S., Qatar, and Israel and Egypt to achieve this. Now, as the article goes on to say, while offering support for diplomatic efforts, the countries also signaled readiness to escalate pressure if necessary. Who do you think they're going to put the pressure on? That's right, Israel. They expressed dismay over the Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the GHF, labeling the initiative not only dangerous, but also degrading to those who it aims to assist. According to the signatories, the operation strips Palestinians their human dignity. We condemn the drip feeding of aid and the inhumane killing of civilians, including children seeking to meet their most basic needs of food and water, the statement said. The Israeli government's denial of essential humanitarian assistance to the civilian population is unacceptable, it added, demanding that Israel comply with its obligations under international humanitarian law. Now, the coalition of countries didn't stop there, as the article tells us. It directly called on Israel to immediately lift restrictions on the flow of aid and to urgently enable the UN and humanitarian non-government organizations to do their life-saving work safely and effectively. The United Nations recently reported that at least 875 people have been killed while attempting to access food through the U.S. and Israeli-endorsed GHF, which has supplanted traditional UN channels for aid distribution. Again, more selective outrage. Where's the condemnation of Hamas? The reason these people aren't getting to the food is because Hamas intercepts it. They actually, there's videos of them killing people that are trying to get the food, and then they sell it at inflated prices and feed themselves and make money doing this. And yet Israel gets the blame, as always, because Israel, again, is separated from the rest of the world. It's a spiritual issue, a spiritual battle, because ultimately they're fighting against God here. So where's the condemnation of Hamas? And then there's this, and this is really a pathetic story. U.S. envoy pans Israel-Syria intervention, doubles down on support for Damascus. This is from the Times of Israel. Defense Minister Katz responds to the ambassador named Tom Barak. He doesn't know the facts after he complained that strikes to protect the Druze complicated efforts for regional stability. A U.S. envoy criticized Israel's recent military intervention in Syria on behalf of the local Druze community amidst deadly sectarian violence, saying Monday it was poorly timed and complicated efforts to stabilize the region. Uh, Tom Barak, who is U.S. ambassador to Turkey and special envoy to Syria and also has a short-term mandate in Lebanon, made the comments in an exclusive interview with the Associated Press during a visit to Beirut. He doubled down on Washington's support for the new government in Syria. Remember, the new government in Syria is led by a terrorist, an al-Qaeda terrorist who has not changed his stripes and whose people are acting just the same way al-Qaeda did when they were on the outside looking in, when they weren't in any government. He's saying there's no plan B to working with the current authorities to unite the country still reeling from a nearly 14-year civil war and now racked by the new outbreak of violence. And who started the outbreak of violence? The Bedouins attacking the Druze. And what did the Syrian army do? They sided with the Bedouins, started killing wantonly Druze people. Barak's remarks came as White House officials reported alarm at Prime Minister Netanyahu for ordering airstrikes in Syria. And after last week, a Washington official spoke of the administration's displeasure at the use of military force. Now, Defense Minister Katz comes to the rescue. Defense Minister Israel Katz responded to Barak's comments by saying the envoy isn't aware of the facts and that the strikes were necessary. Why? To stop the violence. Barak spoke following more than a week of clashes in the southern province of Shweta between militias of the Druze religious minority and local Sunni Muslim Bedouin tribes. Syrian government forces intervened ostensibly to restore order, but ended up siding with the Bedouins before withdrawing under a ceasefire agreement with Druze factions. Hundreds have been killed in the fighting, and some government fighters allegedly shot dead Druze citizens and burned and looted their houses. In the meantime, Israel intervened last week on behalf of the Druze, who are seen as a loyal minority within Israel, and they certainly are, and often serve in the military. Israel launched dozens of strikes on convoys of government forces in Shweta and also struck the Syrian Ministry of Defense headquarters in central Damascus. Again, the U.S. doesn't seem to comprehend who this terrorist leader is. He is a horrible human being. He is a murderer. He continues to murder. His people continue to murder and do terrible violence. They did it first against the Alawites when they came in there, and that's a sect of Islam, of Shia Islam. And then, of course, the Christians, they went after them, and now they're going after the Druze. So, as usual, we'll have to wait to see what happens. God bless Netanyahu for standing up for the Druze and doing the right thing here. And God help the USA get some people that know what's going on there and do something right. This is just really a terrible, terrible story from the U.S. side. I'm Don Stewart. Again, we'll bring you the latest as always. Thanks for watching. Until next time, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.